When I ask UX people who practice user research what is their biggest challenge, I often hear how hard it is to engage stakeholders with research. What are your thoughts on this topic?
I agree. I think it's a hardy perennial. One of the reasons why I do all this stuff is that I really enjoy making things better for users. And yet I'm ordinarily working with very large organizations where it's not in my power to make changes. Other people have to be convinced to make those changes. So how do you actually get the right people involved, the decision makers and the people who have in a position to actually make the changes? That's always a crucial and important part of the work, and hard.
Yeah. We'll talk about some examples maybe later. I'm hearing from UX practitioners who work in agencies as well as from self-employed ones that research is usually the first thing to make it out of a project proposal. How do you position UX research to your stakeholders to prevent this from happening?
I'm not sure that that question completely makes sense for my particular business. I'm a user experience consultant, and so the project is doing the user research, usually, or some sort of user-centered activity. I'm rarely doing anything that's not a user-centered activity, so it could be that my work just doesn't get done in the first place. But it's not that I would put in a proposal and then say, no, we're not going to do the user research, because that's the thing I am proposing ordinarily.
All right. UX researchers sometimes experience a tension between conducting research they were asked to do by their stakeholders, for example, product managers, marketing managers, engineering managers, versus research they were not asked to do but think they should do. And this is obviously happening mostly when you're an in-house practitioner. What are your thoughts on balancing this tension?
I think that applies also to me, that many times I would like to advise a client to do this, and this type of research. But whether they'll actually agree to allow me to do that is a whole other matter. And one of the things that happens quite a lot for me is that my particular area of expertise is, or the thing I enjoy doing the most, is working on improving the user experience of forms. And often clients will say to me, okay, please do an expert review of this form. Well, I've looked at a lot of forms and I've watched a lot of people fill forms in. So I can often make quite a lot of suggestions and they agree with them. They say, yes, you're right. And they think, but that's it, we're done. But I know that expert reviews, although I can give them good information, it's not that I'm giving them bad advice. It's just it's not as accurate as if I did even a little bit of usability testing. So, but they think, our form was better now than it used to be. We've had enough. So actually convincing them to go that extra step and actually let me do the user research is often really quite a big challenge.
Can you tell me about this? Why is this a challenge?
Well, they might say to me, well, why should we pay you to do 5 days' work to get the gold standard of problems solved in this form when we've paid you for 1 day for an expert review and we've already got plenty of ideas for changes and we think our form is going to be better? And it will be better. And so then how do I convince them, yes, but I want it to be really good, and it'll only be really good if you let me test it with real users. So it's quite a big challenge actually getting the right answer for the client. And budgets matter as well.
And does it usually work? Do they understand it and go with it, or do they reject it?
I would say, unfortunately, more often than not, they just go with the, our form is better than it used to be. That's enough. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to your book, which is going to give me lots of good advice about how to win that battle or how to convince these difficult clients. And my thing is, my clients aren't difficult. My clients are nearly always absolutely lovely and a joy to work with. So that is also a problem, because I can't say, oh, you were thoughtless and uncaring people. That's not an excuse I've got. The only thing I can look at is myself and the need to have better arguments to use with them that are more convincing.
Okay. Imagine an in-house UX researcher who is always trying to identify opportunities for impactful research. I know you don't like this word, impactful. What would you recommend?
Well, impactful sounds like a ton of bricks falling on your head.
Making you understand you need to change something. What would you recommend?
We mean effective, perhaps.
Yeah, effective.
How do you like effective?
All right. What would you recommend they do to better identify research opportunities?
I think we have to understand that our passion about making things better for users is something that people agree with in principle, but in practice, organizations are organisms. I wrote about this in the textbook that I co-authored, which is called User Interface Design and Evaluation. That book came out in 2005, so some of it's a little dated now, but the parts about user experience or usability in organizations really aren't dated. They're still very much up to the point for today, I think. And one of the concepts I talked about there was thinking about organizations being organisms that exist in many dimensions. So the pull to do a better job for your users is only one of the different pressures on people. Other people that you've got to convince have got different pressures on them, and coming to them and saying, this is important in my role, I want you to see it from my point of view and change your point of view to meet mine, is a very low probability argument. I mean, it's not got a high chance of success. But trying to understand, okay, this boss, this developer, this other stakeholder, what are their goals in their work? What does their job description ask them to do? How can I make the things I want them to do help them to achieve what they need in their job description? That is a much better way forward. So one of the things I've always thought is that, for example, usability testing just before release, where you go to a project manager. In my previous role, before I got into user experience, I was a project manager. And as a project manager, I did not want someone coming to me 10 days, 2 weeks before release and saying, oh, look, we found all these lovely fresh problems. I really didn't want to hear that. Okay, what can I do to try and deny those problems, minimize them, put them off to the next release? I was then in a situation of triage, of trying to get that problem list down to the least I could do and still get my product out on time. So that was not a good time to be doing usability testing, because a lot of user experience problems could go into the cosmetic problem box to be forgotten forever. So thinking about, well, when is the best time to do that testing so that your project manager or your product manager or whoever gets to make the timing decisions can actually plan that work in, and it be part of an orderly piece of work, not a really bad surprise to them. That's one of the things to think about. That's how project managers think. Project managers think about minimizing the amount of work, getting stuff done on time. I would say project managers don't really care about users. That's not in their job description, you see? So you have to try and think like the people that you're reporting to.
Can you tell me a story about a difficult stakeholders, maybe that did not understand or respect UX research? And you don't have to name names.
Well, I don't think I've ever come across a stakeholder that didn't understand or respect UX research. And they were normally, I think they were always really interested in it. But being interested in it and making the decision to go away and act on it, they're two different things. So, you know, for many years I did a lot of work with the Inland Revenue, that's the UK tax authorities, are now called HM Revenue and Customs because they merged with the customs people. But I'm going back to the days when they were the Inland Revenue. So I worked for a number of years on a pack of forms that were called the employer's pack. So this pack of stuff, every employer in the UK has to operate what we call pay-as-you-earn tax, which is to say you have to deduct a certain amount of tax from each employee's pay, and the rules are rather complicated, but it's quite effective in that most people in the UK don't have to fill in a tax return. Their tax is all dealt with by their employer. So for the country as a whole, it saves a lot of people doing tax forms. Point of view of the employer, you have quite a lot of work to do. And the revenue would send out a pack of forms an inch thick, that's like 2 centimetres thick every year. And they were really brutal. You know, it was a heavy pack in every sense. And I tried for a number of years to get them to engage with this. And so my first round of usability testing I did with them, and we identified 400 problems or something. And they were, I think they were just mesmerized. You know, it was like, we can't really cope with all these problems. It wasn't that they didn't agree with the problems, they'd watched the testing, and so I think it was just more than that person I was working with could cope with. And the changes were going to be so extensive that it was his product. You know, I had called his baby ugly, really, and he kind of knew it was ugly, but it was like I'd put him in a position where he'd have had to sort of turn around and say, look, I've been messing my job up for the last few years, and he hadn't. He'd been doing as best he could with a very, very demanding and complex set of documents. So I had actually created a difficult situation for him where it wasn't that he denied the research, but that he sort of had to minimize it in order not to ruin his own job and his job description and his performance reviews. And it took me a long while to realize, I mean, I just couldn't understand why, when he agreed with all these things, why he wasn't willing to act on so many of them, and why he went into a bit of denial, and nothing really happened. And in the end, it took some political changes. In fact, one of our newspapers ran a shock horror feature where they spread out all these forms and documents and various things and said, you know, how could anyone possibly have to cope with this? And they ran a big feature. And all of a sudden, it stopped being the problem of the relatively junior person I'd been dealing with, and it became a problem at a very senior level. And they sort of, uh-oh, what are we going to have to do now? And so all of a sudden, the job description of the person at senior level became, you've got to improve this product. And now what user research is trying to do and what the senior person is trying to do are in alignment. And we completely, I mean, they just totally blew away the entire design, and we started again. And the reason they blew it away was originally they just thought, oh, well, we'll make a few changes. And they allowed me to do some user research, and when I showed them some of the videos and got them interacting with the products themselves, they suddenly realized that they had a major, major problem on their hands, and they just decided to do a scorched earth thing on it, really, and start from scratch with most of the stuff in it. So it was a big success in the end, but it was a big success through an initial failure, you know, an initial situation that, thinking about it, trying again, and some political events happening, we were then in a position for it to be a big success in the end.
I think this is a great story that demonstrates the other pressures that you talked about earlier.
Right.
That they have, yeah. Many UX practitioners are always looking for creative deliverables that engage their stakeholders with research findings. What are some deliverables you found to be working well for you?
I think the real deliverable that's worked the best for me is been finding a stakeholder whose job is to align what they're doing with user experience, and then getting that stakeholder to have the experience in some way. So when video first came in, that was really empowering, because it was a way of helping the stakeholders into the world of the user, to get them to try it. And going back to that pack of horrendous forms, one of the things I did at the first big feedback meeting, when we got permission to go ahead and do a real redesign on it, was that I set out the room with a pack of the forms at each desk, and I rolled the video for a bit, and you know, the particular user said, well, at this point, what I want to really know is whatever. And they asked a question, and I just stopped the video and said, okay, now you try it. You try and answer that question with the pack of forms in front of you. So all of a sudden, they couldn't be passive observers anymore. They had to enter into the world of that particular user and try it for themselves. And that was a real eye-opening moment. You know, it was a coup de théâtre, a theatrical moment where opinions started to really change from, we've just got to make a few minor changes, to, oh dear, we have got to rethink this entire experience. So it was really just putting somebody who's ready to be put. The thing was, they were ready to be put into the user's opinion, and that helped them into the user's shoes.
Last question. How can UX practitioners tell if their stakeholders are bought into research?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, sometimes I think all of the stars are aligned in the right, you know, constellations, and it's all going to go really well, and it doesn't. And other times I have no expectation of a good result, and everything just lines up, bingo, and, you know, we have a fantastic result. I don't know. I mean, I think trying to be as sensitive as possible to what other people are saying, what they're really doing, understanding as much as possible about the situation, but you don't always know what's going on. Sometimes things can happen, you know, sometimes things can happen that have got absolutely nothing to do with you and that you couldn't possibly have anticipated, and you're never going to win. You know, I always say, I mean, the very, very sad story was I was working on one particular product, and the person seemed quite reasonable, but he just wouldn't make any of the changes. He just wouldn't even listen, have any attention, couldn't understand what was going on. Sometime later I found out he had a brain tumour. I mean, he was a very sick man, and, you know, in the spectrum of things, making changes to that product, it was incredible that he was coming to work every day, never mind trying to do something differently. And I think of that person because I just think, you don't know. You can't know what pressures someone's got on them that may be absolutely nothing to do with the project. But on the other hand, you do have to try and understand the pressures as much as you can, so that you're not just making elementary mistakes like presenting a project manager with a great long defect list just at the point when they're trying to minimize their defect list. You know, that's something that you could know and think about. So yeah, that's just it's a sad and rather unfortunate story, but it's one that really made an impact on me.
Okay, that's all I have for you. That was very interesting and useful. Thank you very much for your time.